Hey everybody, this is Javi, and you are watching and listening to the Inner Child Collective, where you and your inner child heal for the better. Welcome. Thank you for your time and listening and watching me. I really appreciate it. As you can see, some things have changed. I am doing PowerPoints from now on. And the reason why I'm doing this is because, for one, I'm a nerd for PowerPoints. I love and twerk for PowerPoints, for real, and not for play. And also, this is for the deaf and hard of hearing and those with auditory processing disorders, and people who are visual learners, So this is an opportunity for me to reach out to those folks. And also, it's just me like loving PowerPoints, and it's easier for me, right? And so it's just an added bonus. I just love doing PowerPoints. Enough of that, right? So again, this is for them, and I'm really excited about this. And for those who don't know me, before we get started, let me introduce myself. Let me know, for those who don't know me. Um, I'm a psychic and intuitive medium and author who specializes in inner child therapy. The way I work is this. I place a strong emphasis on the generational and historical trauma we've experienced as children. I also discuss the archetype we've adopted and internalized as a result of the trauma, because we have more than one archetype running through us. And I also focus on the unconscious stories, the stories that we tell ourselves on the unconscious level, those stories that drive our actions. I talk about those and how we use those stories to talk about the self, as adults, and how we can rewrite them by connecting with our inner child. So here we go. Here, a quick reminder. If you're a fan of the Inner Child Collective podcast, be sure to leave a review wherever you listen to it. I'm looking forward to it. I love, reading reviews and things of that nature. Also, if you have a question, and would like to have it read on air, anything about the inner child or anything I do, or anything of that nature, you can email your question to innerchildcollectivepodcast@gmail.com, or just leave a comment when I post a Q&A logo on my social media pages. Again, you can email your question to innerchildcollectivepodcast@gmail.com, or just leave a comment when I post the Q&A logo on my social media pages. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. So today's topic is about specifically about the wounded child and reparenting the wounded child. And so this is what we're going to be covering, for those who are wondering. We'll be talking about what the wounded child is, how they tell their stories through the adult version of us, and the importance of reparenting the wounded child and how we can do that. Okay. So what is the wounded child, right? So the wounded child is a childlike version of ourselves that energetically carries the wounds of our trauma. It's raining outside. It feels so nice. I love it. Again, the wounded child is the childlike version of ourselves that energetically carries the wounds from our trauma. So they are the wounded warrior of the inner child, a collective, right? They are the wounded child, that carries all the stories, carries all the wounds that they have gone through, what other people have gone through, and so on and so forth. It's the archetype that we adopt and internalize as a result of not getting justice for the trauma we've experienced. So this is for folks who haven't had their story heard when they were children. Something will happen to them, multiple things will happen to them, and they did not receive justice as a result of those wrongdoings. So a lot of us who have adopted and internalized the behaviors of this archetype, we're very, very, very much the people who have not gotten justice, from people who are supposed to be protecting us. Okay. And the wounded child usually plays the role of the family historian. They're the ones who keep the family secrets that perpetuate the cycles of trauma within the family. They're the one who protects the family dynamic, through their behavior, and or by keeping the secrets private. or keeping this to themselves rather. And we're often the ones that are angry and hurt due to the lack of justice as a result of being forced to contain these secrets during our childhood. Okay, so we'll get a little bit into that shortly as we go on that last part, because it's extremely important. So, as far as the wounded child and the wounds that a lot of us carry, those who have adopted and internalized that archetype, the wounded child is labeled as such because of them carrying the wounds of trauma. And so there are three ways to do this. There's a physical way, which is the like literally on your physical body. The physical ramifications and or the scars are there on your body. So you have welts from corporal punishment, or you have a loss of a limb. Maybe you got hurt, or maybe you lost or maybe you were almost a casualty of war and you lost a limb as a result. That is something that a lot of children may have gone through, especially in war torn areas of the world, or falling and not being able to recover for whatever reason. But maybe you were a child who was able to to run at one point, or do something of that nature, and you got hurt and you were not able to be mobile any longer, that sort of thing, right? And that's an extreme. Then you have the emotional wounds, the negative feelings and thoughts about the self, your negative messages that we have in our minds, about ourselves, what we, take in it, as children, about the self and about our self-worth. We get that from the outside world. We have those negative messages as a result of what we receive from the outside world. That is not of, of love and light in regards to how we view ourselves and how we are viewed as children. Okay. There's a lack of that lacking of self-worth, self-compassion, and self-appreciation due to the negative messages. It's very hard for us to love ourselves or see our self-worth when we're getting all these messages that we are the complete opposite of worthy. Okay. Then you have the feelings that you are not to exist, and these are just examples, right? These are just examples that I'm reading off just to let you know. But going back to the emotional wounds, that those feelings that you are not to exist because people don't like you, or people have an issue with you speaking up, or sharing your voice, or sharing your opinions, and or maybe you are being verbally abused. And it comes because of the verbal abuse, you feel as if you should not exist, especially if it's perpetual. You have the psychological. So you have the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, complex PTSD, depression and anxiety. Those are psychological wounds. Any sort of mental health issue that is trauma related. You also have the inability to convey your emotions due to the trauma. You have a lot of folks who are being told, or who are told to be quiet, or their opinions don't matter. They keep a lot of the stories inside. So they have the inability to they have the tendency to not know how to feel, or to not be connected to their feelings due to the trauma. And then you have the trauma responses, which are triggers, anything that reminds us of the abuse, which is basically the trauma responses is a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. So let's talk a little bit about the psychological, emotional, and physical responses of the inner wounded child, at least in detail. So our inner child has its own mind, body, spirit connection. Okay, and this is really important for those who are trans. Your inner child, before you transition socially or otherwise, the person you used to be has their own mind, body, and spirit connection. And as a result, not even as a result, but basically, like, that connection is altered and forgotten about due to the trauma that we have experienced as children. So a lot of our intersections, anything and everything that makes us who we are, sometimes, in fact, all the time, when it comes to any sort of trauma, childhood trauma, our intersections are used against us. They're weaponized against us. And that's part, and our intersections make us who we are, and they're part of the mind, body, spirit connection. And so when those intersections are constantly attacked and weaponized against us, we end up getting a lot of those messages in our minds that we are not good enough. There's something wrong with us because of those intersections, because we're black, because we're trans, because we may be disabled, whether or not it's seen or whether or not it's seen, because of my social economic status. There's something wrong with being poor. There's something wrong with being fat. There's something wrong with these things. And so that connection is lost because those intersections are seen as a weapon, because of who we are is seen as, we're seen as the other, therefore we're that otherness is seen as a threat. So that connection, that mind, body, and spirit connection, because of those intersections, because of a lot of those white supremacist ideologies that we have adopted and internalized as children, are that connection that we have to the self, that connection that we have to the core of us is altered and very much forgotten, especially when we start to develop what is called trauma brain. Trauma brain is when everything, the chemical, the biochemical makeup of your brain is actually altered by your traumatic experiences, okay, and your reaction to them. So those who've internalized the wounded child archetype tend to neglect the self and their needs. Out of mere survival, we have the tendency to neglect our physical, psychological, and emotional selves. And this is very prevalent among adults with mental health. I don't want to say mental health issues, but basically struggling with mental health, such as depression, anxiety, in some cases schizophrenia, or whatnot. Drug and alcohol use. I was like, as far as drugs and alcohol, at least abusing them, right? So I just want to make that distinction, okay? Just not being able to take care of your dental, those are just examples, all right? You pretty much get the picture, right? So we have the tendency to neglect our bodies, neglect our spirituality, our spiritual practices, our spiritual selves, and our psychological, in our emotions as well. We tend to put those on the back burner when we are in survival mode. And also it's just another way for us as adults, um, to use that neglect, to use that as an excuse to not hold ourselves accountable or to take responsibility for our own selves. Okay, so that's also something that is prevalent among the wounded child, that need to be told to take care of oneself, or to have people look out for them, because if not, then you're not going to, because deep down there is this feeling that you're not worthy of life, okay? And a lot of wounded children feel that way about themselves, as adults over time when they're unhealed, okay? So, and that is that lack of self-care and that lack of self-compassion, that is basically a trauma response. It's a trauma response as a way to not only put yourself in a state of self-pity, but also like it's another way to fuel the anger that someone is not taking care of you. Therefore, um, why would you care? You know what I mean? Is one of the reasons why we don't take care of ourselves, is because of the trauma response. Is just another way for us to not to feel justified, like, or to blame somebody else for what is going on with us emotionally, physically, and psychologically. Okay, so examples of those responses that I was talking about is, speaking of psychological, emotional, physical. There's the psychological, thinking that you are not enough, that what you do is not enough, right? Blaming yourself for the trauma you've experienced is a huge deal, of self-blame, creating your own psychological wounds, as a means of not taking care of the self and not holding yourself accountable, or responsible for your own healing. Okay, so that's where that goes. Then you have the emotional. You feel angry. You're internalizing guilt and shame around the trauma. There's the sadness, avoidance of responsibility, and personal accountability. And that's another thing. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I mentioned my responsibility and personal accountability. That is another way for us to not only hold on to the anger and not take responsibility for our own healing, but it's another way to avoid conflict. We have the tendency to always get yelled at. A lot of us wounded children suffer from a lot of verbal abuse and always being blamed for something we didn't do, so as a result of that, like, we do everything we can to avoid conflict. We do everything that, to avoid it because we think that we're going to get in trouble, we're going to get blamed for something. So we have the tendency to retreat within the self and use those experiences of being blamed and being retaliated against as an excuse to get angry, or as an excuse to avoid being an adult, basically. And so that's something to take into consideration. Is that, again, is a trauma response, very much connected to the fight or flight response or freeze response, that avoidance of taking responsibility and personal accountability, based on, PTSD symptoms. So it's definitely something to look into, okay, and to be aware of when you're doing this type of work, especially with the wounded child or any sort of child that has been verbally abused, right? You have the physical wounds, or responses rather. So you have the physical violence, you have the self-harm, and then you have gateway or gateway. What did I say that for? Weight gain and loss as a means to protect yourself from further harm. So this is very prevalent among those of who've been sexually abused and who've been physically abused, or being bullied. I know, like, there are many, many, many stories of women in particular who have been sexually abused or molested as children, and as a result, they've blown up, or they've gained. I shouldn't say blow up, but they basically gained weight as a means to protect themselves. If they see themselves or they're seen as unattractive, because of their weight, then they will not be a target for sexual violence. And it just adds to a lot of, or contributes to a lot of fat phobia, and body shaming. The same thing with weight loss. If you lose weight or you look very unattractive in any way, shape, or form, you would not be messed with, right? Or if you were to lose, that's another thing too. If you were to, you know, lose weight, you will be able to attract someone to you. Basically, that's just another body shaming type of situation, and that's very prevalent among those who have been treated with eating disorder. Those who have been sexually abused have like a fluctuation of weight gain or weight loss because it's a means of control for them. It's a means of power and control and protection for them. Same thing with, real quick, um, bodybuilding. A lot of people who have been beaten up by their parents or beaten up by people on the street, like been bullied or something of that nature, they have the tendency to basically over-exercise and do a lot of weight gaining and do a lot of boxing or any sort of like combat sport to protect themselves from further harm. That's usually something that is very prevalent among those, who have internalized the inner wounded child or the wounded child archetype. So the wounds and the stories behind them are living in silence. That's one of the reasons why a lot of us as adults are very angry, because a lot of the wounds and the stories behind them are pretty much not spoken. They are not seen or heard in any way, shape, or form when we are children. And we also have, like I said, that fear of retaliation. And we're also getting those messages, especially from those who have sexually abused us, that no one is going to believe us, that no one is going to believe the story. No one's going to believe our pain and suffering. So a lot of the times we keep it inside because we really do believe those messages. We really do believe that no one's going to hear us. And as a result of that, that leaves an imprint in our mind that would unfortunately make us reenact what happened to us and live in silence and live in that and just live in the closet almost. You know what I'm saying? Children who internalize the wounded child archetype were unable to speak about our pain and our experiences due to the lack of support that we've had, that we get in our homes or in any environment that we are a part of. There's also that fear of retaliation that I was talking about. Also, not having the language to express how we feel. If you're being told time and again that no one's going to listen to you, you literally forget how to use your words. In fact, like this is literally someone, for a lot of people who have problems with reading and problems with comprehension. A lot of us, have the tendency to have things happen to us, and because of the trauma, on top of the fact that we may have a learning or a developmental disability, or what is considered that. I don't like using that word. I don't know what word to use. Like, I guess maybe neurodivergent. If a lot of us are neurodivergent, it may not have the language. Um, we have the tendency to not know what happened to us, and how to express ourselves, at least vocally, which is one of the reasons why a lot of us turn to art, to express what's happening to us. Art therapy is a huge thing. For play therapy is another way that a lot of children who have been abused, or a lot of adults who have been abused, are able to express themselves when they're not able to use their words. But this is also for people um, who just have a hard time talking, just based on how they process information, and also like being told time and time again, um, that no one is going to hear them, no one's going to see them. What's the point of them talking? Also, um, trauma brain plays a huge part in not being able to express yourself properly. Um, when you are in the thick of your trauma, your brain really does shift. The biochemical um, the biochemicals in your brain react to the stress that your body is going through, that chemically and emotionally. So some parts of your brain shut down, and sometimes, like, you cannot speak. You're not able to, especially if you have a stutter, or you're an introvert. You just have a way of, you have to process things first before you're able to speak. So there's like a whole nother thing. In fact, I can do a video around that too, like the power of language within um, the power of language among those who have been who have suffered trauma. Okay, so I'm going to move on from that. If y'all have any questions, by all means, let me know. Okay, so the result of not being able to uh, get support, or you have that fear of retaliation, or you don't have the language to express how you feel, the wounded child holds on to the trauma stories over time. Okay, we continuously feel ignored and unheard, which makes them react from an unconscious, subconscious level, because they're holding on to these stories. Everything is stored in our unconscious mind. The inner child and their wounds are like in your subconscious mind. And so what ends up happening is that when you feel unseen and unheard, you store those stories, and then you react. The child reacts. From an unconscious, subconscious level. Like, they drive the behavior. The stories drive your behavior. When they are not spoken verbally, they come out through our actions. And so it happens on an unconscious, subconscious level, and you just simply because you don't know what's happening. On the conscious level, you know that something's not right, but you don't know exactly what exactly is driving this behavior, in regards to your anger, in regards to your fear of retaliation, in regards to you not being able to speak around certain people. And it's because a lot of those stories are just taking up a lot of space in your brain. And remember, our brains can only hold so much information before it starts to shut down, or you start to forget, or you start to um, you just pretty much start to reenact a lot of your story. Either way, those stories are still there. They're pretty much molding you and your relationships with other people. And so we have the tendency to reenact a lot of the stories that the inner child is holding on to through our adult self. So again, the wounded child becomes an adult. If the child is not remains unseen and unheard of, because for whatever that connection, that lack of connection, that mind, body, and spirit connection we were talking about, they are going to act out through you. They're going to be running you. They're going to be making sure that they are heard through you, through their behaviors, through that anger, to that rage, or that their lack of interaction with people when there's a conflict of any sort. Now, speaking of adults and wounded children as adults, and like I said before, we all become adults. So those who've internalized the wounded child archetype often have issues with emotion dysregulation. We don't know how to act when we are angry. Everything is or sad. Everything is like a huge explosion, or we turn it inward. Either way, and like for wounded children, a lot of the anger that we experience, you know, is explosive. It comes out, when we are disrespected or something is triggering us. And a lot of it comes from like this contained anger and um, this contained feeling of rage. And so when we're not able to express that, or we come from families where there is a lot of when there's a lot of you being told to be quiet, shut up, sit down, or whatnot, and you're not able to voice your opinion, or you feel like your opinion is not going to be heard, that adds to the emotional dysregulation because you are not able to process your emotions in a way that is very healthy and it wasn't supported anyway as far as your emotional expression. So when we're growing up and we are hit with an issue that reminds us of our childhood, we snap. We go off, or we just go overboard. Anger is like a huge issue with wounded children. And so intense anger or sadness is often the baseline emotion. It stems from that feeling of injustice, which is very prevalent among those suffering from historical and generational trauma, and stems from the fear of retaliation. I want to talk a little bit about the feeling of injustice. I know I keep saying that, but I also wanted to bring this up too. It's very prevalent. That feeling of injustice is very prevalent among those who have suffered from generational and historical trauma, namely marginalized and colonized people. And what ends up happening is that a lot of us come from households that are very entrenched, or environments that are very much entrenched in white supremacy. We all have internalized it. To be honest, a lot of us have internalized that. But what ends up happening is that a lot of what has been internalized is passed on to us children, which is why a lot of us do not feel protected. A lot of us, especially when it comes to our intersections being used against us, a lot of that stuff that we are feeling as a child, it ends up coming out, especially it comes out as an adult, but especially when we are in the hero mode, because we also have the hero archetype, and that we become the activist. We pick up that archetype, and what ends up happening is that we allow our wounds to, and allow that feeling of injustice that we've experienced as children. We have the tendency to they have the tendency to come out when we are activists, when we're doing activist work, political work, because it feeds into that it feeds into that energy that we felt when we were children. And this is an opportunity for us to speak out, not only for ourselves, but for people who are hurting just like we are, which is why a lot of us become social workers. A lot of us become light workers. A lot of us become, very a lot of us we get into the helping profession because of that's where we get the wounded warrior comes. That's where a wounded warrior comes from. A lot of us who are in the social work profession, or have been in the social work profession, a lot of them are wounded warriors, which means that a lot of us were, wounded children, and we see the injustice that we have gone through being played out in the justice work that we do through our professions, or through our spirituality and our political work. And we are to be aware of this, because this can, even though it's all fine and good, that we have that feel that everything that we feel, we have that fire in our bellies, to do enough to do a lot of the activist work. What ends up happening is that a lot of that that we feel towards um, the industrial complexes that we are a part of, or ones that have done us dirty for so long, for centuries rather. We end up turning that anger inward or turning it onto comrades, because a lot of us have not. A lot of what we do involves from a lot. It evolved from a lot of unhealed work around ourselves. So it's something to be very mindful of when you, if you're an activist or doing something pertaining to the health profession, helping profession, why you're doing this and what drove you to be part of that other collective in that manner. So it's just something to be aware of, because you'll burn out real quick. You will burn out. But that's neither here nor there. Like, we can definitely like talk about that another time. But we can also talk about that, because it's just very, especially among activists, y'all, it's a lot. So again, let's keep moving. So there's also that fear of retaliation. The sadness and the anger is a fear of retaliation. Like I said before, we are afraid that we're going to get punished and persecuted, for standing up for ourselves, for being ourselves, for speaking up. And that's one of the reasons why we stay quiet. That's one of the reasons why a lot of us are, quote unquote, too nice, or quote unquote too sensitive, because we're taught that in order for us to be safe, we are to be nice. Okay, so that is like the poison that comes with niceness, and toxicity around niceness, and it keeps us from taking responsibility or holding ourselves accountable for what's happening, because we feel justified. Okay, we feel justified in feeling these things. So as a result, that's one of the reasons why we unconsciously reenact the trauma. Remember, we have that input with that imprint. We have that imprint. And so we react with people, places, and situations that reminds us, or reminds us of, or is similar to the trauma that we have gone through. We reenact a lot of those scenarios, real or imagined, because we felt powerless as children to do anything about them, but we can do something about it as an adult. So yes, if someone says something that reminded you of that bully who fucked with you in the 5th grade, trust and believe, you about to go off, right? You know what I mean? Like, or the government reminds you of the school that you went to, that did you wrong. So therefore, we're going to create situations where we're fighting the government, or we're like, or anti-government, and that's fine, because I'm also anti-government. But if it's hurting you in some way, shape, or form, to fight that to the point of burning out, that is something to be mindful of, because anger can become poison in a minute if you're not careful, in regards to using it. So this gives us the opportunity. So we create opportunities to get the justice we didn't get as children, either through activist work or just basically picking a fight with somebody, or starting to argue with someone, or waiting for someone, to go off on you so you can just pop off, right? Or to say something wrong to you so you can have that opportunity to make up for what you didn't have the chance to do when you were a child. So that's why we do this. It gives us the opportunity to express the intense anger or sadness within us, even if the people, place, the situation is not related to our pain. That's a typo. I'll fix it. But basically, even if the people, place, or situations is not related to our pain, is not related to our pain at all. Okay. So anger basically is a deep-rooted hurt turned inward. Many of us were not protected as children, and we desire justice because we weren't protected as children. We did not have the opportunity to express our hurt, which manifests into anger over time, because we're holding on to those stories and we're holding on to the scenarios in our mind. So this is really prevalent among those who who have dealt with complex and chronic trauma. It's just everything starts to manifest. It's just one thing after another, and it's just various forms of abuse, or just consistent abuse, or consistent, you know, uh, uh, consistent trauma. And so you're like, it just over time, it just crests over, and and most of the time, a lot of us trauma victims as children are, did not have the opportunity to express that hurt because we will be retaliated against, or we were just not in a safe place. And so we engage in certain behaviors or create scenarios, real or imagined, that would justify our expression of anger. A lot of us, we go through real life, real shit, right? We go through real life situations, but we also make shit up. And what I say by that, what I mean by that is that we have the tendency, those who have gone through, you know, one abusive story after another, we have the tendency to store those stories within our mind. And so what ends up happening is that if someone who does not mean any harm does something, to trigger us in some way, shape, or form, or someone does not act the way we would expect them to, or we feel that we're lied to in some way, shape, or form, we end up making up scenarios, especially when we don't have the answers to someone's behavior, or we don't, they're not upfront with us for whatever reason, because they feel that they don't have to be, or they feel like they don't have to further explain themselves. What ends up happening is that we connect the dots. We start making comparisons, and coming up with stories that are very much similar, to what we went through as children. We start finding proof. We start collecting proof. We start collecting evidence, based on what we went through before. And so when we have enough evidence to justify our expression of anger or sadness, we act as if. It doesn't matter whether or not you have proof or not at this point. You're going by what you have always gone through. You're just connecting the dots and using the puzzle pieces that you already had that would explain the behavior of this person based on what you went through as a child. So we use those, we create scenarios, um, to justify our expression of anger, or to any sort of emotional dysregulation that we want to tap into. Or, yeah, that's what I mean. Sorry about that. So as a result, we end up self-sabotaging. A lot of us end up self-sabotaging relationships, opportunities, because of a created scenario that prevents us from seeing the truth, or prevents us from seeing, that person's true intentions based on our trauma. Okay. So I have a story for y'all, speaking of which, because when I was doing research for this, I'm like, yo, this is my shit right here. So basically, I myself internalized the wounded child archetype. For years, I have had the tendency, and I still struggle with this, but I have the tendency to become angry, extremely angry when I feel like I'm being disrespected, or I feel like I'm being silenced, especially when I know I'm telling the truth, right? And so it was to the point where I didn't have to say anything. People felt the energy of my rage. People felt the energy of it. And I myself am an activist, like an online activist and literary activist. And what I'm doing here is some activism too. But I used to, whenever I felt like people were not listening to me, or I felt like I was being silenced, or I felt like someone was trying to undermine me in any way, shape, or form, I went off. Like, it was just like, and sometimes the stories that I had in my mind were either real or imagined. Sometimes I would just like mull them over and find patterns upon top of patterns of similar stories that have occurred to justify my rage and my anger and my or my expression of it. Due to my spiritual journey, you know, that has gotten, I'm able to like acknowledge that and do something about it. But despite my spiritual journey and how hard I've worked and how far I've come, I'm still struggling with anger. Like I still struggle with emotional dysregulation, just like everyone else who have been traumatized. Because I also have a trauma brain. Um, I still struggle with anger and that lack of justice I received for the abuse I endured as a child and as an adult. As an adult, not just as a child, but as an adult. It wasn't until like my friend and fellow psychic TLN, a shout out to them, and Ashworth Scott Life Sculpting. Um, they're the ones who like gave me did a reading for me, and they were like, um, "Could you tell me a little bit about your rage?" I told them about my rage. Like, yeah, I snap whenever I feel, you know, like I'm being disrespected or silenced. They were like, no, do you ever? I'm talking about. Do you know where it's come? Do you know the core of it? You know where it's coming from? And they were like, I'm concerned because there are so many trans men and transmasculine men out here, or transmasculine people out here who are angry, and they're telling the truth, right? A lot of us like a lot of us have a lot of anger, and deal with a lot of anger for a variety of reasons. And so they were like, write that down, write about those experiences, write about that. And it's true, like because I was just making up. It was to the point where I was making up scenarios that weren't even true in order for me to go off, and they would play in my mind. So when I was doing this writing exercise, and I started doing it around this past week during the retrogrades. Um, I remember feeling while I was writing, feeling that rage and of my inner wounded child, and feeling and seeing the patterns of wanting to seek revenge on people, or wanting to use my magic in any way, shape, or form to seek revenge on people who have hurt me in the past. And there was like this ongoing theme of feeling like I was justified in such things. In fact, it was one of the reasons why I started doing. One of the reasons why I got into hoodoo at one point, because I figured that why fuck with the cops when you can when I can go ahead and do it myself, and or protect my own place, or protect, go after my own assailants. You know what I mean? So I'm doing all this writing, and I feel like now I'm starting to see a pattern. Now I'm starting to see why exactly I am the way I am, and how I feel the way I do, how I think the way I do. And it's because of the fact that when I was a child, not a lot of people stood up for me. Not a lot of people, not a lot of people stood up for me or defended me. And there were many times when I was either lied on or felt as if I had to protect other people. Um, and I went through horrendous abuse to the point where my my life was threatened on 3 different occasions. Like I was almost killed on 3 or 4 different occasions. Like literally someone, like people I knew, trying to take my life. And so no one was punished for that. And as a result of people not being punished for that, I'm like, you know what? I felt this lack of justice. And that's when I was like, you know what, if no one else is going to protect me, then let me go ahead and do it myself, regardless of what I look like to other people. Which is one of the reasons why I'm like, I don't understand why we can't use our magic against people. I really had that mentality. Why can't we use our magic against people? Why do I have to sit here and be killed? When in actuality, I have the power to do this. And so the core of my anger was that feeling of that lack of justice, and feeling as if no one was going to protect me. And because no one was going to protect me, especially like God, the Christian God, and white Jesus were not going to protect me, then they got to move out of the way so I can do it myself. And so that was my wounded child, and I did a lot of mirror work as a result of that, and told her and read those letters and read all those letters that I wrote to myself and all that stuff that I wrote to myself. I read it in the mirror. I did mirror work around this, and I could feel the anger of my words, and I could feel it popping off the mirror. And so that's when I started to realize, like, look, I can pour love into myself and tell my wounded child that she's worthy and she's able to. I'm giving her permission to be angry, but not at the expense of other people. And so I was able to like start that process of healing around that. So that's what I've come to as far as my own story. And I realized that the best way to heal the wounds of the abuse and the wounds of trauma is to reparent the wounded inner child. That's the only way we can get through this, is by reparenting the wounded child, our inner child. And the ways that we can do this is to assure, we can all do this, like listeners and all, assure your inner wounded child that you, the adult, are a safe person. Assure them that their story is going to be heard. And I'm going to go back to the safe person, because wounded children, because they weren't heard, they don't know who to trust. Because they've been punished, or because we've been punished, we don't know who to trust. We don't know. And as a result of that, we stay quiet, because we don't trust anyone with our story, which is why they're able to accumulate over time. So it's up to you, the adult, through your healing process, as you go through your healing journey, to assure your wounded child, assure them that you are someone to be trusted, that you're not going to bail on them, that you're not going to walk away from them, that you're not going to tell them to shut up and be quiet. At the same time, to put up healthy boundaries with them as well. Okay? And whatever that looks like to you, that is between you and your inner child as far as boundaries. But you, first and foremost, they are to know that you are a safe person. Another thing is to assure them that their story is going to be heard. The reason why they are acting out, wilding out like this, through you, the reason why their wounded child is wilding out is because they don't feel heard, they don't feel validated. And because of that lack of connection with the mind, the body, and the spirit, they're acting out. And so when the wounded child feels heard, just like any other inner child, when they feel heard, they feel validated. And when they feel validated, they can trust you. This establishes trust, which will allow them to open up to you the adult version. So when you're doing your meditation work, or when you're doing any sort of work to connect with your inner child, they'll come to you effortlessly, because they are able to trust you. So you allow the shadow emotions to emerge and be felt. It's okay to allow your child to snap. Allow your child to be angry. Allow your shadow emotions to emerge and be felt. I noticed that in the spiritual community a lot. I noticed that in the spiritual community that a lot of folks in that community don't allow themselves to have their emotions, or to express their emotions. Speaking of inner child, here's my cat right here. Hi, Shadow. He comes through. So basically, a lot of folks in the spiritual community do not allow themselves to feel their emotions, because there's shame around the emotions. There's shame around feeling the emotions, the intensity of those emotions. They're seen as low vibrational. Well, what people don't understand is that when you don't allow your inner child to come through, that's not healing. That's not spiritual. And you're not doing yourself any favors by stuffing your emotions aside. In fact, that's why you have a wounded child to begin with. So allow your shadows to emerge and to be felt and to be acknowledged, so you're no longer ashamed of them. And you no longer have to feel as if you have to hide them from yourself or from anybody. And if anyone tries to make you feel ashamed of feeling your emotions, they ain't trying to fuck with you. They ain't trying to rock with you then. And they have their own stuff going on in regards to their emotions. So you are to allow yourself and your inner child, for the sake of your healing, to feel the wide range of all your emotions, and to be felt and have those emotions be felt with support. Okay? Show them, your inner child, through your healing, that another world is possible. And when I mean another world, I'm talking about a world without trauma, a world where they're not holding on to the stories of trauma. The wounded child holds on to the stories because they want justice, and they feel like it holds their perpetrators accountable. But they're holding themselves hostage, and they're holding you hostage. So it's time to let go of those stories. But in order for you to let go of those stories, the inner child has to understand through your healing, that by helping them heal, you will help them understand that there is a world without a trauma story. There's a world without, and a life without a trauma story, that you are able to hold joy and peace within yourself as well. You can create a whole new reality outside of the trauma. Both you and your inner child have the power to do that. So in order for you to do that, you have to release those old stories, so you do have the room and the energy to create and live a new life that aligns with your healing. And you are to, first and foremost, most importantly, you are to be patient. You have to be patient with yourself. You have to be patient with your inner child, because you're learning a new way of thinking. You're learning another way to feel your emotions, and you're letting go of this energy which you're physically holding into your body. If not, you physically hold you, all that anger is in your body, and you're learning a new way of thinking. So you just have to be patient with yourself if you slip up, and have compassion for yourself, and know that, like, this is a journey that is ongoing. Inner child healing is an ongoing thing. No one's asking for perfection, but you are to hold yourself accountable, uh, and hold yourself responsible for your own healing, because no one is going to do that for you. In order for you to not be the wounded child, you are to let go of the wounds and let go of the stories associated with those wounds. But you are to be patient with yourself, because just like, listen, I know for a fact that I'm not going to stop being intensely angry after a day. All I can do is acknowledge it and do everything I can to hold myself accountable if I even think about acting a fool for no reason. And to be patient with myself, because my inner child is angry, and she is now just being heard. She is being heard. And so I am allowing her to tell her story through writing. That's my modality. My modality is the written word. It involves the written word. Maybe you have a way to interact with your inner child and hold space for them when they're angry. But the first and foremost, you have to be very patient with yourself. Okay? So that's some heavy shit that we just talked about. But it was something that we needed to talk about. So let's take a break. And we'll be right back after these messages with the Q&A portion of the show. All right. See you soon. So welcome back. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me. I know it was some heavy shit that we just talked about. For those who just found me, my name is Javi, and you're listening to the Inner Child Collective, and we are going to be doing the Q&A session here. Shout out to the couple of people who did send questions. I really appreciate it. Y'all help me keep this going. So I love answering questions, and if y'all have any, by all means, you can go. You go to my email, and it'll be Inner Child Collective podcast at gmail.com. So here we go. So the first question is, Can a person have conflict with their inner child because of memories? Also, when your inner child speaks out when they are happy, can it be overwhelming? So thank you for the person who sent me this question or posted this question on my Facebook page. I really appreciate it. So this is like a two-parter, and it seems like there's a couple of questions here, so I'll answer them one at a time here. So yes, as far as you having a conflict with your inner child because of memories, absolutely. A person can have a conflict with their inner child. The inner child is a separate entity. So it really is like raising your own child. They're a part of you subconsciously, but they're still a part of you. So there's going to be conflict, especially with every children. A child can be hard headed, and they're going to do what they want to do or try to do what they are going to do. And so there's going to be a conflict, and the conflict is an indication that the needs of the inner child and the adult are not aligned. And so get to the solution for that is to get to the bottom of the conflict instead of just continuously going back and forth with your inner child. They do deserve to be seen and heard, but instead of just going back and forth with them, get to the bottom of the conflict. And then when you get to the bottom of the conflict, you can make boundaries or put boundaries boundaries to make sure that the two of you are respecting one another, because again, your inner child is the childlike version of yourself who has gone through a lot, and so they deserve to have their space and you deserve to have yours, but they also have to have boundaries as well. And getting to the bottom of the conflict will help alleviate the conflict, or at least a compromise. And so for the second question, in regards to being overwhelmed by happiness, happiness can be overwhelming for you, the adult, when you are not used to experiencing joy in any capacity. So we never had the opportunity to do that, especially for those who have been in a household where anger and despair, or you're centering the emotional state of a person in the family who has depression or anything of that nature, is really experiencing joy is just not something that comes naturally to those who are in survival mode all the time. So experiencing the joy, or expressing the joy of your inner child, or expressing joy rather, expressing joy rather, excuse me, is your inner child's way of getting your attention by responding to whatever is bringing them joy. So the solution around that, when you feel very overwhelmed, just take deep breaths. Just take a few deep breaths and realize that you and your inner child y'all deserve to be happy. Y'all deserve to have that experience. So experience that together, because that's your inner child's way of waving their hand and saying, look, this is what I like to do. This brings me joy. Let's keep doing this. And as long as it's not destructive and you're not doing something to like drown out your inner child, or like to do something, that will hurt them or you in the long run, it's all right. Just experience that joy together. Okay. So I hope that answered that question. The other question that we have here is about safety, for your inner child and you in certain situations. So it says, what are ways to reassure your body, inner child, you will be safe and it will be okay before they have to go into heavy situations or triggering places? So one, this is a really excellent question in regards to safety and boundaries. Ask yourself whether or not your presence is even necessary in the first place. If it's if you're in a situation where you don't even where it involves family or some sort of situation where you don't even have to be at, then don't go. I'm gonna be honest. Do not go there. Do not introduce yourself, your energy, or your inner child to that situation. Don't even entertain it at this point, because it's okay for you to avoid heavy situations, or any heavy situation or places that you and your inner child won't feel safe and you're not able to be your authentic self. It doesn't make any sense for you to put yourself in that situation. If anyone is pressuring you to do that, you have every right to not deal with them. You have every right to say no to them, and to really put those boundaries up. And so if you are obligated, though, to enter a situation where you'll be uncomfortable, be sure to have access to your support system. be it your chosen family, trusted loved ones, and even your spirit squad, like your ancestors. If you ask for help, they will make a way for you to be safe. Okay. There's also an exit plan. Be sure to have an exit plan. Make sure if you get that vibe that something about to pop up or someone's going to make you uncomfortable or do something that you ain't trying to be about, have an exit plan. Have a friend call you. Have an alarm. You know, just so you know, or if for and physically sit by the door. So when shit goes down, you can dip. You know what I mean? Like, have an exit plan, so you and your inner child will be like, no, we gotta go. And also, if those don't work in any way, shape, or form, or until those things are employed, assert your power by establishing boundaries, because especially with family members, they'll try it. They will do anything and everything they can to exert their power and control over you when they realize that you don't deal with that anymore. You have changed. And so it's important to set those boundaries and say to your family members, or basically show them through your actions, that you don't have the energy or the spoons for it. You don't have time for this. They asked you to be here. You did this for the kindness of your own heart. And if they can't act right in any way, shape, or form, you got to go. You know what I'm saying? Or you got to go. You have got to go. Right? If it's a job type of situation, make sure that you're right next to the door, or you're just like, or sitting next to people that are supporting you, and basically even in any way, shape, or form, like establish your boundaries. Establish your boundaries, even physically, because it's important for your inner child to see that you are placing their well-being and yours, first. That they are the priority, and because you are making yourself the priority. Okay, so I hope those questions, those have been answered properly. Um, and if anyone would like to have any sort of clarification, by all means, you can email me or DM me, via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or whatnot. So that is all we have. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. This was a really fun experience as far as the PowerPoint. I'm going to be doing this from now on. And yeah, it definitely helped me stay on track too. Shit. All right. All right. But do you, spirit? So thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Also, if this episode resonated with you in any way, shape, or form, visit these podcast hosting sites to subscribe to or download the Inner Child Collective podcast, and be sure to leave a review. The more people who know about this, the better. Also, you can follow me on social media. I'm on social media all the time, except for the third week. That's where I take my vacation. So we have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and I will put those things in the description. They're always in the description, so you'll be able to see them and follow me and subscribe to those channels. So if you would like to ask a question, if you have a question, you can email the question at to Inner Child Collective Podcast at gmail.com, or just leave a message, or not a message, but leave a comment where I can post the Q&A logo. No, let me say that one more time, because that don't make no sense. Just leave a comment where I post the Q&A logo on my social media pages. So I'll say that one more time. You can email me your question by using Inner Child Collective at Inner Child Collective Podcast at gmail.com, or leave a comment where I post the Q&A logo on my social media pages. So thank you so much for your love and support. Until next time, peace.